It's been over 4 years since I bought my first 3D printer. And if I compare the printer that I bought back then towards the one that I got right here, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say that the 3D printer was the most complicated part of actually printing stuff. But if you fast forward until today, not only are the machines so much better than what they were back then, but I've also learned how to actually design stuff, and I've created products that has been actually mold injected and that we've sold over 10,000 units of. And I also have multiple different solutions that I've designed and printed for my actual studio. But there is a couple of things that I wish I knew from the beginning when I was starting 3D printing that I thought I'd share with you in this video. So if this is your first time here, I just want to say hi, hope everything is good. My name is Peter and I am from Sweden, making a little bit of tech videos, filmmaking videos, 3D printing videos and vlogs and all that good stuff in between, va? So if you like that kind of stuff, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button. But of course, you can also wait until the end of the video and do that decision later. It's all good. But one of the first things that I wish I knew when I started 3D printing was that you don't necessarily have to start with the cheapest printer. Now, I'm not saying that cheap printers are bad in any way or form, because you have printers such as the Bambolab A1, which is a freaking amazing printer, and they also released the Bambolab A2, which is kind of the upgrade to the A1. But what I am saying is that when you're buying a printer, you might want to consider what kind of printer do you want to have in the long run. Because if you buy a cheap printer, you might get disappointed that it can't do the things that you want it to do 1 or 2 years from now. Of course, you can sell it and then you can upgrade and so on and so forth. But what I would recommend is to actually go for the mid-tier printer that is encapsulated, so that you actually have a chamber that you can heat up and then you can print a little bit more complex material. You have the carbon filters and you don't have to worry about all the stuff that comes with having an open printer. And usually they're also more reliable in the long run, and you don't really have to worry as much about the actual printer when you're printing stuff. And that for me is a key takeaway that I learned from the beginning, because I wish I would have paid a little bit more and gotten a little bit better printer than what I did back then. So I would say that you should buy the most reliable printer that can fit within your budget. And if you have the possibility to stretch your budget just a little bit to get the better printer, maybe $200-300, then I do highly recommend you to do that. You should also start with sensible size, because buying an H2D or an H2S is usually not necessary to get started with 3D printing, because most of the designs that you can actually find on Maker World is designed to fit the P1S, the A1, the P2S, and so on and so forth. So you don't really need to have the build volume of the H2D, of the H2S to get started. And then of course we have the filament, and this is an entire jungle. There's so many different filaments that you can choose from. So how do you know which filament that is actually good for things that you're doing? Now the workflow that I have is that whenever I'm doing prototyping, testing, and designing stuff that doesn't have to be load bearing and such, I usually tend to go for PLA. And I think that PLA is a great material to get started with. It's easy to print, it's super fun because there's so many different colors, and you actually get a really nice result on the prints that you do. But it's also not as reliable when you put it in sunlight, because it's not UV resistant, and when you use it in water, it has a tendency to actually leak, so you shouldn't use it for waterproof stuff. And it's not strong, it's very brittle, and the longer the PLA is outside or in a room, etc., the more brittle it's actually going to get. That is my experience. Some people might have different experiences with it, because not all filament types or filament brands are the same either. Whenever I'm done prototyping and I need to print an actual functional part, I usually tend to go for PETG, but this is also depending on what the actual use case is going to be. But if I print my EXO boxes, for example, I usually tend to go for PLA, because they're not designed to be heavy load bearing or be exposed to UV light. So I guess we could say that PETG is the most reliable plastic or filament that you can use for pretty much anything that you have in your everyday life. And then of course you have TPU, which is the same material that these flip-flops are made of. And the cool thing with TPU is that the layered adhesiveness is insane. It's so incredibly hard to break a TPU print once it's actually printed, but it's also very hard to print TPU, and it's not something that I recommend for beginners. And then you have ASA and ABS, which is more chemical resistant, but also way stiffer and requires a higher temperature printer in order to be able to print. And then of course you have PACF or nylon, which I don't recommend for beginners at all because it's super annoying to print with, super hygroscopic, so it really attracts the moisture that is in the air and makes it super wet when you're printing, unless you're drying it when you're actually printing it. This phone case that I got here is printed in nylon, and it was a pain in the butt to actually print. So if I could only stick with one filament for the foreseeable future, it would probably be PETG, mainly because it's sturdy, it's flexible, and is also UV resistant, which is nice. Now that we talked about the printers and the filaments, the next thing is the actual design process. A couple of things that you might want to have in your home is available on MakerWorld, which is totally fine. You can download them, you can print them. It's all good. I think it's super cool that there's a possibility to do so. But when you want to have that specific thing for that specific thing that is on your specific wall, then it's really freaking cool to be able to design that and print it on yourself. And it's kind of bridging the gap between the digital and the physical world when you're learning how to design stuff that you could actually print and bring into the physical world. And when you're starting to design stuff, you don't need to turn into an engineer all of a sudden. You can start with simple things. Maybe it's just a bracket, or maybe it's just a simple box that you can put your pens in. As long as you start to learn and understand the design process and why things work the way that they do, you're gonna be developing that skill over time. And it's very crucial that you think about that over time, because designing things takes time. There's so many different iterations. Like, you start designing one thing, and then a couple of weeks later you have the final, and then a couple of weeks later after that you have the ultimate final version 3.2/revision 55. So the first couple of designs that you make will most likely not be complicated at all. And you'll probably miss out on all the tolerances that you need to take into consideration as well. But that is a part of the process, and that is part of the fun that makes 3D printing so freaking engaging whenever you get started with it. You gotta think of it like this. A good 3D printed design is usually simple, not complicated. So the simpler you can design it and make it look good, the better it's most likely going to be. It's also crucial that you see the failures as a part of the process, because otherwise it's very easy to give up. But when I was designing the BC6, it was so many different iterations before I actually found one that I myself thought was worthy of pursuing and refining. So in the beginning I had something that looked like this, and I mean, like, it was good, but it didn't work the way that I wanted it to work, and it was too thin, it was too fragile to actually carry something, and it didn't look unique. And I've been going through so many different iterations of the BC6 with both the handle, the stack locks, the actual tolerances for the cooling pack that you have in the middle. All of that is stuff that you need to take into consideration when you're designing stuff, but you can't do that unless you actually print the prototypes in between and do those iterations and try and test in the actual physical world, because it's very easy to sit in Fusion and see like the 0.10 millimeter tolerance and think that, wow, it's really big. But then in reality, you're not gonna notice it because, hey, 0.10 millimeters, that is like, you can't, come on. But when you're sitting at the computer and doing the actual design, it looks like 0.10 is like this, which is so mental. Yeah, I don't know, you can say CAD blindness, I guess. Another thing is the maintenance of the printer, because that is something that you need to do on any sort of machine. It doesn't matter if it's your car or if it's your 3D printer, maintenance is required. And some machines require less maintenance, some require more, but the Bambolab H2Ds that I got right here and behind me, they are a little bit complicated when something breaks, because you need to take apart the entire tool head and so on and so forth. But If you keep the maintenance going on these machines, then you're not going to have as many issues as you otherwise would. I do recommend you to have a couple of replacement parts for your specific printer, because if something breaks, it's very nice to have the replacement at home and not having to order it in order to get started with your printing again. And as we talked about a little bit earlier in the video, considering what kind of printer that you need to have for your specific solution is very important as well. Because if you're printing, for example, ASA, ABS, then you want to make sure that you have a very well ventilated space, or that you have an exhaust fan going outside. I don't think that PLA and PETG is super toxic or not even considered toxic within the 3D printing realm, but it's never bad to be safe, right? That's why we use safety goggles whenever we're using the angle grinder and so on and so forth. And even though most printers nowadays are incredibly safe, you can never be too safe. So having proper fire extinguishers and fire alarms in the room that you have your printers in is also something that I consider crucial. So the biggest thing that I wish I knew when I bought my first 3D printer is that it's not really about, printing as many things that you can find online. It's more so about being a part of the process and actually creating your own solutions. If you just lean into it, the opportunities are endless. There's so many different possibilities with the 3D printer nowadays, and how far they've actually come than what it was just 5 years ago. So I would love to know, which 3D printer are you looking to buy and why? Or if you have a 3D printer, which one are you actually using? And do you have any tips for people that are watching this video that is about to start with 3D printing? Do drop them down below. And if you like this video, do give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe, because I would love to see you in the next video. Peter from Sweden is saying goodbye.